Hey, everybody, I'm Jody Vance,
And I'm George-Affleck.
and it's time for
Empty homes, tax my home to the place, blah, 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 blah. Unspun. Little
more taxes. What's
more
the answer to
taxes.
everything, George?
Tax.
Tax it.
Tax it.
Tax it.
That's what we'll do. I know a solution. Tax it. I
Raise
know a
those taxes in
solution.
an affordability crisis with inflation. We'll just
It's going to solve the
tax it.
problem. Yes. So we're referring, of course, to the empty homes tax last night at council being approved unanimously, which I was surprised that Melissa voted for that. To
DeGenova.
double, I think. Yeah, DeGenova, councillor and MPA, to double it. I don't know what it is. It's up to 5. It's like ridiculous. It's up to 5%.
5%. It was
5%, almost
3%.
double.
It's up to 5%.
Yeah.
Yeah, almost
So
double.
double down
Uh,
on something that's not working. Why?
to give the illusion that it's working and a unanimous decision, like, why would somebody who has opposed that pivot like that? Why wouldn't
It's
you oppose it still if you
it,
disagreed with it to this point?
it's a very popular tax for sure, and you need to be brave, I suppose, to vote against it, which I did, and I took a lot of heat for it because here's the thing that I argued at the time when Vision introduced this tax. I said I understand that we have this issue with empty homes, and I think we have to find a solution for that. But the solution that you're providing here is a taxation, which I don't think is going to solve the problem. How do we even know the numbers? Are going to go down? What? And there was the issue of related to and they always were like, well, we're going to get more rental suites because of this. I'm like, how does that work? Where's the logical leap to rent people who own these places they're just going to sell them and then they'll be part of the, if they do that at all, or they'll be forced to lie and say that it is their main home when they have a home somewhere else. I don't know. They'll find ways to have somebody live there. It
They'll
just
use
sets
it
up
as
this.
an Airbnb. They'll use it as an Airbnb and pay the tax.
Well, or they'll just they'll find ways to have people living in it. It's my
Right.
argument was, why are we so obsessed? And it was going to cost, but on it was going to be, the cost is to administer that tax was about $10 million a year. $10 million a year. Now it raised $30 million. But if it was going to be successful, I argued, so if the goal here is to get rid of these empty homes, so the success of this tax is when goes to zero. That means we've
Right.
succeeded. Well, it hasn't gone to zero, and then as it declines, what this guy is doing, and the mayor is now, and now this council as a whole, let's double that number so we can keep getting it up. And so it becomes a forever tax. First of all, you lose sight of what the goal was to get to zero. So now we're not going to understand the math anymore. And
No.
frankly, the empty homes report that we received, and it's really hard to figure out what's empty and what's not empty. And so they assessed to see, based on hydro data and some other data, it was not very scientific, that around 7 to 10%, they said, of the homes were empty, but 90% of those empty homes were downtown in condos, and 90% of that 90% of those downtown condos were in Cole Harbour. And so, okay, we have a problem in Cole Harbour with a lot of empty homes.
Yeah.
And I know there are streets where there are people not living, but they're not generally they're still empty. They're still, because those people live there, however, whatever way they've done it. It's not the kind of tax that works. What you need to focus on with millions and millions of dollars is building more homes. The 95% that are full, how do we get more of those? And then guess what happens? If you want to reduce to 10% or 5% or whatever the magic number is of empty homes, you make the assumption that you're always, even in worst case, if you have 5% empty homes always, that's the always number, but you keep growing the 95%, then you have less empty homes and you have more full homes. That should be the
Right.
focus. And I know politically, though, it's just doesn't fly, because people go, you just want foreigners moving here and buying our homes and not living in them. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, as an administration, your job should be to do the thing that makes the most sense. But of course,
Yeah.
and that sometimes isn't the most politically prudent thing. So you make a political decision over common sense, which is quite common in Vancouver, especially recently. And in this case, this empty homes tax is absolutely ineffective in achieving the goals, which is to get less empty homes and to get more rental units on the market and to build more homes. It's not doing any of those things. It's just punishing people who perhaps quite often, we had a lot of foreign nationals here who lived here and they made Vancouver their base, but they spent half their year or more traveling. They're diplomats. A lot of diplomats live in Vancouver, make it their base. We have a lot of
Yep.
sports, people who are in sports, people who are in arts. A lot of people from New York had places here that I met when this was happening. They've all gone. All these people who actually used to contribute to the arts and used to be involved, and these are people that came to Vancouver. They love it here. It's too hot in the summer, so they come to Vancouver for 4 months. They bought these
Yeah.
condos, whatever, and they were like, "Well, I'm not going to pay this empty homes tax, and I don't want to lie, and I'm
Yeah.
American,
It's
so
not
yeah,
worth it.
I guess I don't. I guess
Yeah.
they don't want me here. So bye." And they took themselves and all the money they gave to the arts groups. And left. And what does that achieve? And anyways, you can't win this politically, though. I know people are going to at me. Oh, you don't understand. You want, it
I'll
doesn't
save
work.
them from adding you, George, because I know where you're coming from here. We've talked about this numerous times, and the fact that we're jacking up a tax that really isn't solving the problem. That's the key here. It's all those other bits and all those other stats are really important, and I agree with you on so much of that. For me, it's the prioritization of this conversation over the things that would see building homes for people who need homes,
Mhm.
by way of clearing the decks, permits and approvals, and the processes that right now have strangled the city in a way that is untenable. It is
Mhm.
clearly a problem. It is untenable. It is untenable for the private sector. It's untenable for developers. It's untenable for small businesses. And we're going even to the next level on small business because they're taking the empty homes tax. And they're like, you know what, guys? That's a great idea. Let's put them on businesses. Empty storefronts now. People, there's a place down the end of the street here that has been shuttered since pre-pandemic. I'm going to say it was like late 2019 that the business that was there just wasn't making it through. It was, pardon the lawnmower that's just fired up outside my
I
place,
can't hear
but
it. I can't hear it.
okay, good.
Yeah.
But this place literally sat empty for years and now has new business. Like there's paper on the glass that says
Mm-hmm.
what's coming, but we have no idea when it's coming. And when we've asked around the neighborhood, because everybody wants,
Yeah.
they're like, oh, they're still waiting for permits. They're waiting for
Yeah.
approvals. So you're
A
you're going
business
to then
license.
be taxed while you're waiting for the business license before you get the approval to put in the venting you need to make the whatever you're going to sell in the. It's just like, who would do that?
It's funny.
Why would you do that in Vancouver?
Well, it's funny because I don't understand. Melissa Genova voted in favor of this ramp up of the empty homes tax, but she's all over against the business empty tax. So I'm a bit confused by that. I will say though, when I was in office, I did try to find a way to write a motion somewhat similar. I couldn't find it. I couldn't get support though of it. But it wasn't. I didn't call it a tax, first of all, because it is true there are many units, retail units that are sitting empty because the owner just simply, for whatever reason, they don't care. They don't care. They are quite often offshore. So how do you deal with that? I
They're
know that in
holding it.
Dunn,
They're
they're
holding it.
just sitting on it. They're
Yeah.
sitting on this piece of property they bought 1 billion years ago. They pay the property tax for them. That's peanuts. So I see where they're going with this. But that said, one of the worst organizations for empty units is the City of Vancouver. They have a ton of empty retail units that they don't rent out because they're asking for too much on the bottom line. Vancouver, for those who don't understand, we have a
Hold
clean.
on. The highest
Yeah,
best use. Yeah.
highest best
Go
use. They
ahead.
have
Sorry.
to, as in their role as a government, they're required to make sure they don't undercut their competition. So they can't rent it at a discount. But you could rent it to a discount for arts groups. There's also a question why. Okay, you know what? The world is changing. Retail space has become less important, but we still need homes. I know that there are. You can look around. There are old grocery stores in sort of areas that have turned into cool units of houses. People live in these things, and they've made them into
Yeah.
really hip kind of arts spaces or whatever. But the zoning in most of these retail spaces don't allow that. So if there are units that are empty that because the owner just can't find anybody because it's too expensive, then maybe if the city was wanting to be creative, and that's kind of what my motion is
Yeah.
saying, how do we change the regulations that are within the control of the city? The mayor is asking for basically a different kind of time. It's not going to happen, but you have to provide incentives or look at the zoning and say, you know what, maybe this area doesn't need as much retail anymore because there's not enough people here. You know, Dunbar, I'm sorry, if you don't want anybody to live there, which they don't, they're against development, then your retail is not going to survive. And that's why,
Yeah.
and the best, price for those retail, why would I pay, $30 a square foot plus for a space that nobody's going to visit because nobody lives here? So you have to consider that. So the neighbors either have to understand, okay, you're making this choice not to have people live in your neighborhood. You're going to lose retail because there's nobody who lives in your neighborhood. Whereas if you look at
Yeah.
areas where I live downtown, you can't. There's a whole bunch of retail under my building because 10,000 people live within a block of the hair salon, the barbershop, the grocery store, the another
Coffee shop.
barbershop,
Yeah.
coffee shop,
Yeah.
the dry cleaners. They're all right there
Yeah.
below me because people live there. So
Yeah.
what can the city do? Tax it? That's not because guess who pays the tax anyways? It's the people who rent the spaces. Anyways, it's like taxes.
And
like,
I feel for the small business entrepreneur or the independent who has secured a space and aspires to fill it with something that will contribute to the community in a way. I've got actually my cousin's wife opened in the Strathcona East Van sort of area a mercantile there, and I watched her struggle with the permitting process, and it was already an established business beforehand, and she was literally going to take over
yeah,
the space from the previous, like the person that still owns the property. She was going to lease the space from the person who was basically doing the same thing there. It
yeah,
shifted from a restaurant to like a mercantile, and the amount of red tape that was associated with that, and fees and garbage and just a bunch, like it's just
mm-hmm.
already so difficult to
Yeah,
do that
uh,
here. Like, and here
100%.
again, George, it comes down to Vancouver's model being broken, because you can see
Mm-hmm.
these great little shops in places that might not have 10,000 people living above it in a big building. But I point to Ladner often because I do find myself there. Tawasin has a thriving sort of quote unquote downtown core, and more people moving to that community all the time. They're doing gentle density in a way that is smart. We talk about Port Coquitlam a lot on this
Mm-hmm.
podcast. We talk about, New Westminster, Burnaby. We just the further you get out of the city and how the density is increasing without radically changing the landscape. And yes, the downtown core is a bit of a different beast. I get that. But at some point, there has to be a way to say, oh, you live in the city and you're going to have a business right over there. We're going to give you a break. We're going to move you up the line with
Yeah,
something in here that creates incentive, I guess, to fill these spaces in ways
yeah,
that
it's true.
that give people an opportunity to make a margin,
100%.
like a
I
little bit.
remember in office there was a woman. She came to me. She was very frustrated. She was opening up. I think it was like Pilates or yoga or maybe a bike riding one. I don't know. It was one of those exercise spaces, and it was way over in Southeast Vancouver. A little retail space that she had to rent. She had to sign a lease, and then she had to go through the process to get approval. And it'd be months, 6 months, 8 months, and she's paying this rent because of course the owner's like, you pay the rent, you signed a deal. You can't submit the
Yeah,
application to the city, or if you have to get Vancouver
right.
Coastal Health involved, God forbid, you need all these people to get involved, and they take forever. And you're sitting there with a space at $10,000-$20,000 a month with no
A
revenue.
month.
That's and a lot of people don't know this when they get into it, and so they're until
Yeah.
they, I'm gonna open a business. It's gonna be great. Oh my God,
Aspirations
there's my
of the
life
ice
savings
cream
gone,
shop.
and yeah, and
Yeah.
I haven't even opened
In
yet.
6 months. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the
I've
city
seen
the
it a lot.
city
I've seen it a lot.
doesn't care. They don't care.
No.
They really don't. And that's no offense to
But
staff. It's because the politicians are not being more thoughtful in how we can structure government, the bureaucracy, not change it all. Just say, let's create $10 million a year empty homes tax department. Why not a $10 million a year small business department? Well, hey, there's a good idea.
thank
Like,
you. There's a
you know,
great idea. We need to fix it, Vancouver. We need to fix it. Because
mhm.
going down some of the streets like West Fourth Avenue or West Broadway, and rolling by the empty spaces, or there's a lot, especially with we saw it on Cambie Street when they were doing the Canada line, right? Like the impacts on business is significant when
Mhm.
that major infrastructure piece is coming into play. Eventually, those properties will be even more lucrative, but in the meantime, there are a lot of places that suffer. And we see the graffiti. I drove by on West Broadway, a big shuttered building with huge tag on it, and I thought, God, I hope they address that and
Mhm.
take that down soon.
So I don't know. I
Yeah.
address things in Vancouver. Come on.
The tags are everywhere. And I know we weren't really planning on talking about the dealing with the graffiti and quickly and the broken
Uh-huh.
glass. What do you call it? The broken glass
Broken window syndrome or something like that. Huh?
syndrome. Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but seeing it, really prevalent everywhere, and I was going down. I was driving back from the ICBA gala that we were at the other day, which was really cool. Russell Wilson, former Seattle Seahawk, such a great. That's a chat for another time. But coming in the
I'm
Uber,
like,
and
who?
because when
Oh
I'm
yeah.
driving, I know you were so funny at the
I
table,
was thinking,
going,
who's
"Who's
stand-up
who's this?"
comedian? Who's Russell? I was thinking it was Russell. What was that? Was stand-up comedian?
Peters.
That's
No,
who I was expecting.
no. Really? Oh my
No, I'm
God, you're
kidding. I'm
hilarious. No.
kidding.
So I'm coming back in the Uber, and when I'm coming in the Uber, and it's, whatever, 9:30 at 10 o'clock. And I'm looking out the windows and taking in the city and whatnot, and coming down West 4th Avenue. And I noticed there are a couple of businesses with the metal rollers, a la
It's not legal.
Manhattan, right? And tagged on the
Yeah,
metal. And I thought, are we going to get to a place
like
where
Hong
we no
Kong or
longer
yeah.
can window shop in the evening? You can't walk through the neighborhood and just
Yeah. Yeah, the broken windows thing is a real problem because some retailers would put the blinds on the inside, right? The metal blinds at night, but you can still see through. And the day they'd open up. Now they're putting the blinds on the outside, which are not legally allowed to do, as far as I remember, on the regulations for the city. You're not allowed to gate your like that on the outside of your retail space.
why
It's
is
not
that?
permitted because it's ugly.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
I
I
think
thought
that's
there
it
might be a
is an
safety
aesthetic.
reason.
No, it's an
Okay.
aesthetic thing. I think the city just doesn't want that kind of closed behavior as a
Right.
pedestrian. Vancouver is built with a very focus on a pedestrian city. We have the 22 communities. It was designed that way, and it was intentional. And yet you have these walking areas. And if you and I always find it this debate because banks are terrible at this. They put these things and they always get the corner unit of these
Yeah.
when there's a new development happening, and they put a wall along these retail spaces and they ruin. They're getting better, but it's always a terrible thing for the experience on the street, especially after hours. When if you're
Yeah.
walking down the street and it's just a wall, it doesn't feel very safe. And so if you have windows that open into things, it feels safer. You feel more comfortable
It
walking
feels
down that
more
kind of street.
open. Yeah.
Yeah, and so
Agreed. Agreed.
so that was an intentional policies by the city of Vancouver long ago. And so you're not allowed to, as far as I know, unless they've changed something, do that without a permit. And it's really tough to get a permit. You can't even actually put gates. If you have steps going up to your space and you want to put a gate at the bottom of the steps or something, you can't do that either. You're not supposed to
Really?
do that. Yeah, no, they're really quite strict about that stuff. That's one instance. But, but then you have this problem with graffiti and smashed windows and all this stuff. And like, well, what
And
am I
people
supposed to do?
living
It's
in the
costing me a
stairwell.
fortune. Yeah.
People living in the
We
stairwell
got a
because
guy like that. He leaves in the morning. Every morning he's out there sleeping, and you say, "Hey, Kevin, can you just get so I can get in?" And
yeah.
then eventually he
I've met
leaves.
Kevin. Yeah.
Yeah, you've met Kevin.
He always apologizes. He'll open the
Yeah,
door for you,
he's got good days
depending
and bad
on.
days. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Good days and bad days. It was a bad day for the people at the Gucci store, and we a
yeah,
couple of months ago. I guess it was 5 or 6 weeks ago, but we just saw
yeah.
the footage
Interesting.
because not CCTV footage though. Don't get that confused.
No,
We can't have that because that would be
never.
monitoring too closely. But within the Gucci store, these two assailants, they pepper sprayed the security guard and came in with guns blazing. The staff are running. It's terrifying footage, terrifying. And then they stole like $30,000 worth of stuff, which isn't hard at a Gucci store. And then they come out, and there's another camera angle that is another private camera, and they peel off some of their stuff, their hoodies and hats or whatever. They just like dump it, and then they run inside. I think it looks like a parkade or something, which there is another private security camera, and they
Mm-hmm.
come through a door thinking they're free and clear, and really show themselves. So now the cops
Ah,
are putting out the
nice.
visual of these two assailants, these two dudes, who terrorized the store. And it got me thinking yet again. First, it got me thinking of like, why are we finding out this 6 weeks after the fact? But that's a policing thing. Tanya Byzantine from the Vancouver PD was saying, we have to do our due diligence when
It
we're
takes a while to pull that
investigating. And
footage together. You have to go ask the private guys for that footage. You have this whole process. It's quite complicated.
exactly.
I was privy to this, obviously, in council, and I was elected just after the riots, 2011, for the hockey riots, and so
Right.
we were presented just after I got elected. They had mastered at that point. The city of Vancouver was a leader in about how they would do exactly what you described. And I think at that time there's still some cameras up left up from the Olympics that were kind of still active.
Right.
So they had some little extra footage maybe then, and it was amazing how they would track. They followed certain people, and they would identify this person who did this, and then they would find him 6 blocks later. Then they cut, on the SkyTrain, and then and then follow them all the way home. It's like, and
Right.
that's how they didn't have a lot of success prosecuting people. I don't think after that, but they did have some. At least you could scare the hell out of those people, and you say, you know what, it's not cool, man. we
Yeah, you got
so
away with nothing is what
yeah,
the important part of consequences are. And I wrote about my friend's young daughter who was groped,
that's right.
as it would turn out, by a serial pedophile, like
Yeah,
brutal.
terrible.
And it was at Granville Island. And because we heard the alert by police, and then she stepped forward and contacted the sex crimes unit. They were able to identify and pinpoint exactly where she was and what time exactly in Granville Island. And because there are cameras in that private space that is the market, they were
Mm-hmm.
able to identify this guy who was a repeat offender, and that's what put him in jail. So when
Oh, wow.
people argue against CCTV, which takes me back to city council, because that was on the table at the last council meeting at the time that we're recording this is
Mm-hmm.
Thursday. So Wednesday night, there was the conversation about whether we should have CCTV cameras in the city of Vancouver with crime spiking. The data is what the data is,
Mm-hmm.
right? On average, 4 stranger attacks per day in the city of Vancouver. Why wouldn't we have CCTV cameras? And it was, resoundingly voted down, George.
Yes, Melissa, did you know? We've talked a lot about her today. Brought that motion forward. It's a very similar motion to one I brought forward in council when I was there, but mine was very specific to Granville Street after someone was murdered in front of the bar there, and there was no footage. They had a little one
Yeah,
grainy piece of footage. There was no evidence that they could collect. They still unsolved, and it was an innocent guy. I think he might, if I recall, he was trying to protect somebody else, and he got stuck in the middle of a
I
situation.
remember it. Yeah,
Uh, so,
awful.
and Granville Street is a, show, at the best
It's a
of
war
times and the
zone.
worst of
It's a
times.
war
It's a war
zone. It's
zone,
a
and
war zone.
people, and I think there's my argument at that time was the okay, you may argue about privacy, this is the argument that Melissa got on her motion, that this goes against our privacy, blah, 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 and all those things. But I'm like, but what about, when you have to weigh the odds of criminal behavior? We live in, like, you put private cameras in on my strata, it deters crime because people
It
think,
does.
oh, there's cameras here. I'm not gonna, it makes criminals less criminally. So, I think, and God, you go to England, you go anywhere else, they're everywhere. Cameras are everywhere, and actually, cameras are everywhere here too. They're not always on, but if you look up along most like Seymour, you'll see cameras. They're everywhere, and we have our phones, of course, as you just
Yeah.
pulled up there. There are cameras everywhere. So the question is, and one of the arguments, and I talked to somebody on CKNW when I was filling in this week about this as well, is that well, it's after the fact, so it doesn't stop crime. I don't believe that. I think it does stop crime because I think, just like a law, just because the speed limit is 50 kilometers on the street, so I don't go more than 50 kilometers an hour. Well, maybe sometimes I do, but you put the regulations in, and people in a civil society follow the rules. You put a camera in, it's like, okay, there's cameras. There's a need to basically sometimes baby people in order for you to create a civil society.
Yeah.
And right now in Vancouver, our society is less and less civil. More crime is happening. We know that, even though some people argue that it's not and that the stats are BS. But the
I
stats
saw
are the
that.
stats. The stats
Yeah,
are the
I saw
stats,
that on
and we
social
just
media.
walk
Yeah.
around. Just walk around. Come on,
But there
let's
are
get
people
moving.
that want to say that the policing, more policing and more cameras and more eyeballs on criminal behavior targets marginalized people. Like that's the argument that
Hmm.
regularly comes forward, and I'm not well versed enough to truly understand what that means in terms of like the argument against it being anywhere in the city, like what you say, if we could have it in the areas that are most prolific when it
Hmm.
comes to regular crime, like we're going to put a CCTV camera outside the shops on Davie Street that keep getting pummeled, that
Yeah.
keep getting smashed over and over and over and over. The repeat offenders, which Linda Steele was writing about at the Orca, we should mention at the orca.ca. Linda's written a couple of 2 columns now. She's got a follow up on it. And it's,
Hmm.
you know, I think there's an argument for middle here. Speaking of columns, my middle was not about that this week, but I have written about my want for there to be cameras because I appreciate the right to privacy and I appreciate that there should be, discerning points of view for those who are utilizing this footage in a way
Yeah.
that it's noted that it is not being used against people who are living in poverty, who have
Hmm.
possible addiction issues or mental health problems and what have you. And we identify the people that need the help and go out of our way to help, not harness and incarcerate. But the prolific reoffender, hell yes, let's use that to charge and give consequences to the people who feel that they have a right to smash or tag,
Hmm.
because there's a way to punish. Make Somebody responded to a tweet that you put out about graffiti and saying, there should be like community service. They should have to clean what they've
With
destroyed and
a
then
toothbrush.
right
Really
uphill
make it
both
painful.
ways. Yeah, but community service and learning what it's like for the people who have to deal with that on a rate. Like I think there's a way that this could be less polarizing when the arguments, like how about we try it? You mentioned 2010 in the Olympics. We had cameras here in the
Everywhere.
Olympics
Everywhere.
everywhere. And everybody loved it and felt safe and it was incredibly safe and
Hmm.
successful as an event. I mean, I just feel like there's more to be said there.
I can't get through a British drama without there being solving a crime without CCTV. How do they do it
Right.
in England without the CCTV? They're everywhere. Oh, we'll
And
follow
the
that car
deterrent.
through the highways.
And
Yeah.
always the perpetrators are like, damn, the CCTV got
CCTV
me
got
again.
me again.
So before we move to the province, and we're going to go a
Yes.
little bit longer here. Before we go to the province, I wanted one more thing in the city. It was interesting because we were talking about park board, of course, last week. I was
Yes.
railing. I was so upset about the whole, like everything's broken. And shortly thereafter, probably nothing to do with my
Well,
column,
we
but
before
shortly,
last time we had heard people weren't running again, and we were like, "Oh, great, we don't want those people to run again." Now we found out why, because they're running for council with Vision Vancouver.
but I thought they were Cope Green.
Yeah, all the Greens are bailing on the Greens because the Greens, I guess, don't want them. I don't know, and so they've joined Vision. Oh, great, Vision's back, everybody.
Make
So
note, if you
yeah.
love the park board, if you love the current park board, Vision's your party. Or
Oh
if
my
you
God,
don't like the
Vision's
current
the one
park
who
board,
started this screwing up the park board back 12 years ago. I mean, they're the ones who
yep.
really started this mess and cut the funding. Didn't care about it. I think there were a couple of good Vision people on the park board, but most of it was like it was like a B team wannabes onto the council. And I don't think council, they really wanted to dismantle the park board, kind of like Ken Sim wants to do. But they were doing it more stealth, slowly just strangle it. Whereas
Make
Ken
the
just wants to
public
shut it
hate it
down.
because that's
Yeah.
working. Making the
Yeah.
public
Well,
hate
that's
it is
working for
working.
sure. You know what? It's
Yeah.
taken them 12 years, 13 years to get there. So
Yeah.
Vision's dream is coming true. They dismantle the park board if it keeps going the way it's going. Certainly if Ken Sims, he's promised as one of his promises, and we know politicians always live up to their promises,
Of
that
course. Well, how do you do
he'll
that? Like what
dismantle the
you've
park board.
doesn't the only people that can dismantle a park board though is the park board, right?
Yes. So he has to win a
For the
majority.
mayor.
He has
Yeah.
to win a majority. Then the first moment they have to say, we are now asking the province to dismantle us, and we'll become an appendage. They are an appendage of the city or a department of the city. like
Right.
everywhere else. I mean, every other, and frankly, given right now the politics that we've seen on the park board and the priorities being so screwed up, then maybe that's a good thing. It's a good argument. I don't know.
I'm glad
You
you
know?
said it instead of me this time. What about on the provincial level, hearing our premier dropping F bombs in question period?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I came close a few times in my life when I was in office, but he really,
To be
yeah,
fair, it was an F bomb, one under his breath that he has apologized for and
yes,
said if his mother had heard it, she'd be on her way to the legislature with a bar of Irish Spring. So he found a way to
yes,
dad joke it. He found a way to
yes.
dad joke it.
Even when Irish Spring, like he could just a bar of soap, and frankly, a bar of soap. I'm like, okay, so many things wrong with that. But yeah, I think that my mom would have been with a wooden spoon. That's what that was her
Leather
weapon of choice.
strap.
Leather strap.
No,
The
no, no.
70s.
Spanking. It was just a straight
The
up
good old
smack
days.
on the butt. It was just like,
Yeah, yeah. Didn't see it coming. It's what I did.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, no,
Talk about
he
your
at four.
deterrent.
Yeah, so I said 40 years since there was the last time somebody swore in the legislature. I saw that. I'm like, oh, okay. But
I,
yeah, it's interesting. He was very frustrated. I saw Vaughn Palmer's column saying I think he's exhausted. The guy's had some health issues, obviously, and he's powering through. But sometimes when you get tired, I know that's my swearing goes up the more tired I am. That's for sure, and maybe the
I
more
can
beers I've
agree.
had.
Both.
Yeah,
I can agree 100%. I call it low grade pissed off when I'm
yeah,
tired. I just get low grade pissed off. I don't have time. And when you do look at just the temperature of politics around the last couple of years, and then some, between opioid crisis, pandemic, affordability, layer upon layer upon layer, public states of emergency, provincial
yeah.
states of emergency. Like there's
Oh
been
yeah, it's exhausting.
nonstop barrage. So that must be
And
noted.
I'll tell you, the Liberals, Kevin Falcon, the elections this weekend for in Vancouver, and Kevin Falcon likely to win. So now he'll have a seat, and it's just going to heat up with Kevin Falcon there. And so the NDP better prepare themselves, because the Liberals are finally get the hang of being in opposition. It's taken them a while, but they're
Yeah.
starting to get the hang of it now. And he better prepare himself to have an exhausting time, because that's the only thing the opposition should be doing, is just to task.
Yeah.
Got him.
Got him. You can follow along and get your best possible coverage of that, as well as all things tumbling toward the municipal election on October 15th, 2022, which is George Affleck's birthday, by following George on Twitter, George
Underscore.
Affleck. Yes, on Twitter at Jody Vance, Jody with a Y. My column this week is actually about having a really important person in my life test positive with COVID, and they're extremely vulnerable, had to go in search of Paxlovid, and I learned a bunch of stuff that I think applies to all of us. Some lessons learned. Thank you. Hug your pharmacist.
Yeah,
Hug
I saw
them.
that. You wrote that. Yeah, I don't know
Like,
my pharmacist. She's a bit. She might be. Get away from me. But yeah,
probably. But talk about
virtually
exhausted,
done.
man. Can you
Thank
imagine?
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're definitely front of
Everybody,
line.
yeah, everybody
People.
with symptoms has walked in there. Can I have some rapid tests? We're out. Got any Paxlovid? We're out. I hate you. Like, come on, don't be mean to the pharmacist. Hug them. And when you do get the tools that you need, because I am happy to report that my friend has fully recovered now.
Yay.
And yeah, Paxlovid is a game changer. It is probably the most sought after thing on the planet right now, but it is a game changer for those who are most vulnerable. And we'll leave it at this, George. If you are immunocompromised and super vulnerable, you need to acquire that within the first 5 days of symptoms. That's really, really important. So I just want to push that across the table as we wrap up 169th episode. UnSpun.
Yeah, we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye, George.